Hello and welcome to the Power Tools for Coalitions webinar series. I'm Kinkini Banerjee, the Senior Manager of Coalitions Relations at USBC, and I'm so glad to have you join us for this session. This Power Tools series is organized as part of USBC's training, technical assistance, and capacity building support for the network of state, territorial, tribal, and community breastfeeding coalitions across the country. As you know, we host two series. The Power Tools is one, and this 222 that we co-host with the CDC is the other one. The 222 series that we do is more about breastfeeding projects and initiatives, and those are held on the even-numbered months. And this Power Tools series is totally dedicated to building the coalition's management muscle and capacity, and this is held on odd-numbered months. The access is, these webinars are free and access is open to all interested coalition members. Our topics are posted 2 weeks before each session, and if you can find them on our public website at www.usbreastfeeding.org. And we also send the session details on the coalition's Learning Connection as well. As of April, to streamline access, we've set these webinars up as a series. So now if you register for one, you're automatically registered for the whole series, and that really, we heard back from you, and it really reduces the burden of having to register for every month for a new topic and webinar session. So we know that you may not be able to attend every session live, so each session is recorded. The handouts are uploaded on our website, so you can watch it at your convenience. If you want to find archives of our past sessions, they can either be on your confirmation email that you get, or you can go to www.usbreastfeeding.org/powertools, and this is where I'll show you how you can go. So if you go to our homepage, breastfeeding.org, you'll go to the last tab on your right, and that's Coalition. Scroll down and you'll see the Power Tools webinar. If you click on that, it'll take you to the page. And we have many attendees for today's session, and so all are in listen-only mode, but we really encourage you to ask questions. This is a very vital one that we know that will be helpful to many coalitions. And whether you've written grants before or not, this is going to be a very valuable session. And our presenter is going to present it in different sections. So we usually keep about 15-20 minutes for Q&A at the end. But if you have any questions relative to that section, just send it to us, and we'll make sure to pause and ask it. So here's how you do it. On the right of your screen, you should see a control panel. If you don't see it, it might be minimized. So just click on that orange tab with the arrow, and it'll pop back out. And scroll down. Under the audio section, you'll see a tab which says questions. Click on that tab, and it'll open up a comment box for you to type into. If you have any technical issues during this session, please email coalitions@usbreastfeeding.org, and our staff can help you reconnect. And that brings me to today's topic, Introduction to Proposal Writing. Whether you're new to proposal writing or want a quick refresher, this session will provide you an overview of how to write a standard project proposal to a foundation. You'll hear all about the basic elements of a good proposal, what are the do's and don'ts of writing and submitting a proposal, how to follow up, whether the answer is yes or no, and many, many other tips and tools and strategies that you're going to get. And I am thrilled to have Jeanette Norton present this session. Jeanette currently serves as the Community Outreach Manager for the Foundation Center's office in Washington, D.C. Foundation Center, as you know, their mission is to strengthen the social sector by advancing knowledge about philanthropy in the U.S. and around the world. And Ms. Norton supports the center's mission by helping create, manage, and deliver training programs throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. She increases the center's visibility and supports capacity building of nonprofits, particularly those that are under-resourced. So just keep her name in mind. She's a fabulous resource for many of you that are looking to be reaching out to foundations and grants. Prior to joining the Foundation Center, Jeanette Norton served as the Assistant Manager Capacity Building at the Institute of Arts Management at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. And before moving to DC, she spent several years in New York City working in Broadway theater management, where she had the privilege of working on such productions as Wicked, Next to Normal, and the 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, among many others. So she has a wealth of information about just so many different tracks. And we are so glad to have her today. Jeanette Norton holds an MA in Arts Management from the University at Buffalo and a BA in Theater Arts from Marymount Manhattan College in New York. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeanette.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm just pulling up my slides here. All right, so I hope everyone can see my slides. Once again, today we're going to be exploring some tips and best practices for how to organize, write, and submit a proposal to a foundation, including some helpful do's and don'ts. We will also take a look at the most effective ways to follow up on your proposal, whether the answer is yes or no. A lot of times we think once we submit the proposal that the work is done, but I like to say that's really where the real work begins. So we'll be looking at that at the end of the presentation as well. And as mentioned, I will try to stop and pause and take questions along the way. So please submit your questions as you have them. So let's start by talking about the proposal writing process overall as a whole. It begins with planning. This is an internal process where you sit down with your staff, your board, and you figure out what you need the money for. Right? It's an internal process, and it's basically where you think about what you want to accomplish. All right. Sometimes we like to use a term called mission creep, and that's when we jump ahead to the research before we start and think about the planning. So mission creep is not a good thing. We want to do the planning first and then find out who we want to approach for support. So we'll be talking a little bit about research today as well. We're going to actually walk through each one of these steps in more detail. So I know I'm kind of jumping through them fast here, but we will go into more detail. So this is the research is where you turn the internal process external, and you compile your list of potential funding sources. And we'll be talking about our database, the Foundation Directory Online, in a little bit. And I'll show you how to do a search in that tool, which will be a phenomenal resource for all of you. Next comes the writing itself, all right? This is putting it all together depending on who you have found through your research. You'll notice that this is the third step in the process, right? It doesn't start with the writing, and it also doesn't end with the writing. So that's just one part of the process. So as we think about proposal writing, it's important to know that it is a process and it does take time. So finally, the follow-up, again, like I said, this is where the real work begins. This is what you do once the decision has been made. We usually say about 1 in 3 proposals are funded. It's just kind of the law of averages. Sometimes it involves a little bit of luck, but we'll be talking about the follow-up in greater detail as well. So again, this is a process. It does take time, and we're going to talk about each one of these 4 steps in more detail. So let's start with planning. So this is the first most important step. This is the foundation to your writing. It starts with the planning. Grant seeking is a very competitive process, so you need to be as prepared as you possibly can when you're approaching funders, and that's why planning is important. So some important questions here are first to ask yourself, do you have enough time? And getting started, you need to make sure that you give yourself enough time to go through each one of those steps in the process so you can end up with a competitive proposal. Once you submit the proposal to the foundation, they will have their own process for reviewing them. And we got to keep in mind that many of them get many proposals. So they're going to have their own kind of review timeline. But in general, we say that the process takes about 6 to 9 months from the date your proposal is submitted. to the date that you receive the checks. So to be absolutely sure, we like to say give yourself at least a year to get through that entire process, because you can't spend money you don't have. So you want to make sure that you're giving yourself enough time. And then also, you need to know what you're asking for. All right, what type of support do you need? What is the nature of your request? The most important, or I'm sorry, the most popular types of support are general operating, program development, or seed money for new nonprofits. But there's also money for equipment or building renovation. So it's just important to know what you're asking for. Sometimes it's often easier to secure funding for a specific project or program rather than general operating support or for administrative costs. And why is this? Simply because the impact is clearer to see to the foundation. It's easy for funders to measure the direct impacts and outcomes if it's tied to a specific project. It's hard to measure sometimes how salaries or rent have a benefit to the community, not just your organization itself. So with that in mind, for the rest of today, I'm going to focus on preparing a project proposal, though the process is often similar for a proposal for general operating support. For general operating support, instead, you're going to focus on your organization as a whole rather than a specific project or program of your organization. So that was planning. I'm going to pause for a second, and if anyone has any questions about planning, I can hear them now before we move on to research.
We have one question, and that is, oh, okay. Um, a list of foundations that do funding, but yes, Kim Patton from the Foundation Center had done a previous webinar on grant seeking, and their website is a great resource. So do you want to say a little bit about the website, Jeanette?
Yeah, I will. If we could just hold that, I will do the demonstration of our database at the end, and I will show you how you can compile that list and where you can access the database for free. So if we could just hold on to that question, it'll all be clearer, I promise, at the end once I show the database.
Perfect. That's the only question we have. We have a slight sound, and it might be the microphone, a slight keystroke or hitting the microphone kind of sound.
Oh, it might be my cord here, so I'll try to move it a little. See if this is better.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, let's move on to research. This is all about finding the right fit. So before you can start writing, you need to know as much as you possibly can about the funder as possible. And the research is the most important way to figure that out. So we want to know who we're approaching and most importantly why. So the most important thing here is how does what you do fit in with the funder's interests? Okay, so when we ask funders what the #1 reason is why a proposal isn't funded, they often say it's because it wasn't the right match between what you plan to do and the funder's interest is critical to the success of your proposal. So many proposals often focus on what's in it for them, so what's in it for the organization, and few of us, unfortunately, as nonprofits, pay attention to what's in it for the funder. So a grant proposal should really be viewed as a win-win proposition, a mutually beneficial relationship where each party gets something out of it. This win-win proposition begins with identifying what the funder cares about and is most interested in funding. So our database, the Foundation Directory Online, will help you identify those funders using their field of interest, their geographic focus, and the types of support that they offer. And again, I will give a brief demonstration of that at the end of class. I promise it'll make more sense once the slides are done and we get into the website. last but not least, with research, the why is just as important as the who. So meaning once you have identified your list of potential prospects, you need to tell them why they should care about your particular project or program based on their specific interests. So how will it help them achieve their goals as well as your own? Because a lot of times foundations, we have to remember, are nonprofits just like us, right? They have their own missions and goals and things that they are working to accomplish, and they need us to achieve that mission. You know, we are the boots on the ground. We're the ones doing the work, so they need us. So we have just as much to offer them as they have to offer us, and we want to make sure that it's clear that there's a match between what we do and what they're interested in accomplishing as well. Again, I'm going to get more into the research when we look at the database, but does anyone have any questions about the research before we move on to the writing?
No, not at this time, Jeanette.
Okay, great. So moving on to writing. All right, so we've taken a quick look at the planning and the research parts. Now comes the writing, and we're going to start by talking about formatting. So back in the day, we used to print out hard copies of proposals and type them in and mail them, you know, snail mail into the foundations. But that's really not the case anymore. Pretty much everything now is done online. So grant makers are moving towards more online formatting, which has both its pros and its cons. The pro is certainly that it's more accessible. We can just go online, we can download a proposal form, we can type into the boxes, and we can submit it all within the same day, even if we were short on time. The bad news, and sometimes the con or the challenge that's presented to us, is that many online forms or electronic forms have character limits, which can be very difficult for us, right? We have to type only a certain number of characters. We have to explain our mission, our project in 1,000 characters or less, and sometimes that includes punctuation and spaces, and it's hard to sometimes articulate everything that we want to say into those small limited boxes. So the theory really is, though, from the grant makers, that less is more. So it's, rather than thinking of it as an obstacle, I like to think of it as a really big challenge that we can work to be as efficient at explaining our program as possible. But no matter what the format and what the funder requires, the types of questions that grant makers ask are very similar. It's important to also note that some funders will not have a format at all, but will just ask questions be answered in whatever order they are listed. If you don't have a specific format, if the grant maker doesn't ask for a format or have their own form, we're going to talk about the basic elements here in a second, and you could use this as your template. Either way, I would recommend you put together a boilerplate proposal using the format that we're going to go through in a second here, and see if you can answer all of the questions that I'm going to present. And make sure that you're prepared before you, as part of your planning process, before you even begin the research or the writing. So as part of your planning process, see if you can answer all the questions that we're going to go through in a second. So, and have those written in a separate Word document, all right? It's very hard to write and edit your proposal in the limited spaces, in the forms, and with the character restrictions that online applications provide. So it's very helpful to have a basic template or a boilerplate from which to cut and paste the descriptions and informations from the online application. All right. Also, we all know how technology is, right? You're about to submit something at 11:58. It's due at midnight, and your computer freezes, and your information is lost, or something, technology goes wrong, and we lose the information. So please, please, please don't type in the online forms or the application. I would strongly encourage you to make a boilerplate proposal in a Word document. But the bottom line here is always please follow the funder's guidelines, no matter what they ask. All right, sometimes they say restate the question or letter them backwards starting with Z. I don't know, whatever it might be, even if it sounds silly, just please always follow the funder's guidelines. So we're going to jump ahead and look at the typical elements of a proposal. This is basically just what we have come up with at the Foundation Center. Again, each grant maker is different. We like to say, if you know one foundation, you know one foundation, right? So this is just a typical elements of a proposal. And we're going to talk through each one of these in more detail. But there'll be some type of executive summary, some type of overview. They might be called different things, of course. An overview. Then will come your narrative. This will be the longest part of your proposal. It will include a statement of need, a project description, some information about your organization, and some type of conclusion. There'll also be a budget and supporting materials. So we're going to talk about each one of those in more detail. Does anyone have any questions before I get into the questions that I'm proposing you have an answer for about formatting or just the basic parts of a proposal before I move on?
No, we're good.
Great. Okay. So the way I frame this presentation is to think about what funders really want to know. And each one of these questions will correspond to one of these parts of the proposal here, okay? So the first question is, what specific need are you addressing? No matter who the grant maker is or what the format, I would put money down on that at some point they're going to want to know what the problem is that you're trying to solve with your program, okay? So this is the statement of need. Again, it might not be called the statement of need. They might just say, what specific need are you addressing? But the important questions here are, what evidence do you have to support the need? So it's not, unfortunately, enough for us to just say, this is the problem. There needs to be a little bit of evidence to support that need. It could be a survey done by your organization. It could be Census Bureau data. It could be a quote from the local newspaper or a quote from a hospital, an interview with a doctor, an interview with new mothers, whatever it might be. But there has to be just a little bit of evidence to support that need. You also need to make sure it's clear what audience or community you're serving. I'm sure this is probably easy for all of you on the phone. It's clear what audience, that I am assuming it's clear what audience you're serving. But we want to make sure that the fit is right. So the size and scale of the problem needs to match the size and scale of your solution. So we're not trying to solve all of the world's ills, right? Or maybe we're just focused on our community, or our hospital, or our neighborhood, or our city, whatever it might be. So just make sure it's clear that there's evidence and the audience who you're serving is straightforward. So that's the need statement. The next question is, what are you trying to achieve? Okay, this is your project description. Again, this is the longest and most detailed section of your proposal. This is the section in which you describe exactly how you plan to address the issue you raised in the needs section with measurable outcomes. Okay, this is the solution to the problem that you just raised in the needs statement. Okay, this is also where you're going to talk about your goals and objectives. Okay, so we as nonprofits, as organizations, often use these words interchangeably. Grant makers use them interchangeably as well, but they are different. So goals are broad, general statements, all right, of what you plan to accomplish. They usually start with a verb or an action word. So to increase, to expand, to serve, to provide, to develop, to train, to build, to support, all right, very broad terms. The objectives flow from the goals and are SMART. So you can see the acronym I have up there on the screen. They're specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Okay, this acronym I think is wonderful. I'm sure many of you have seen it before. It's a great way to make sure that you've chosen strong objectives, that they're SMART. So what are you trying to achieve? What are your goals and objectives? This is your project description. Along with part of your project description, grant makers are going to want to know what your strategies are for making it happen. Okay, this is your methodology, sometimes called your implementation plan. Your project description should also detail the particular methods you will use to implement your project. So in other words, what are your specific strategies for accomplishing your goals and objectives? And that's going to be different for each organization and each program and each project. Next, what is your specific plan of action? Okay, this section details your plan of action, which should clearly explain the who, what, where, when, and how of your strategy. Okay, how will your plan be implemented, including who is actually going to do the work? What is going to happen? Where is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? Okay, so you can think of your proposal as an organizing plan. So in addition to a well thought out description, you should also maybe think about putting together a timetable or a step-by-step plan, including exactly how the plan is going to be executed and completed. This is not necessarily just for the grant maker. This is for you as well, for your organization and your staff. So be sure to also emphasize any collaborations or partnerships you may have with other organizations or community groups. Foundations in particular like to see organizations working together in a collective and innovative way. All right, they love collaboration, so they don't want to see anyone duplicating efforts. So if there's an opportunity for collaboration or partnership and it's appropriate, then it would be important to mention that. Along those same lines, if you believe that your project could be replicated as a model for others, you should include that information as well. It'll help demonstrate that the funding from the grant maker is a long-lasting and far-reaching investment. So that's kind of all part of this action plan question here. Before I move on, does anyone have any questions about those first couple questions I proposed, the statement of need, the project description, methodology, or implementation? We're moving on to evaluation next, so that's a big one.
Yeah, we do. One was that for a first-time grantee or a potential grantee, would you have any tips on whether they should partner with someone else because success breeds success, and for a first-time funding, are there any specific tips that you use?
Yeah,
and then,
good question. Certainly, if it's appropriate and you can make a connection with an organization that has a long-standing history, maybe in the community or with your specific population group, I think it only helps to increase the credibility of your organization. So again, if it's appropriate and you can make those connections, whether it's a partnership, a collaboration, if they're providing some of the service, if they're helping with evaluation, whatever it might be, I think it just helps to increase your credibility, and it's a great, would look great to a grant maker for a new organization that maybe they haven't funded before. Good question.
Thank you, Jeanette. And just one other, one of our participants wants to know the fine distinction between when you said the goals and objectives and then your plan, the methodology. How, if you can just give an example of how the strategy is different from a plan of action.
So you have your goals, your large, big, overarching goals, right? Very broad. They filter into your objectives, all right? So if our goal is to increase let's say we have a literacy program, and our goal is to increase the reading level of students. That would be our goal. The objective would be SMART. So one of the objectives from that goal would be to increase the reading level of at least 75% of the student participants to their reading level within 1 year. That would be the objective. The methodology or the implementation part of that would be to say, okay, we're going to have one tutor sit down with one student 2 days a week for 1 hour. All right, so that's how we're going to increase their reading level. I'm hoping that makes sense.
Perfect.
So how you're going to achieve that objective. Yeah.
That's perfect. Thanks, Jeanette. And that's all the questions we have.
Great, good questions. All right, next, evaluation. How do you know if you're successful? Again, this is not necessarily just for the grant maker. This is for you as well. How do you know if your program is successful? So how will you evaluate your project, right, is really important to grant makers. And they're definitely going to ask you this. I would be shocked if they didn't. Because, again, a grant is like an investment. So your plan for evaluation helps them to know that their investment is going to be a solid one. So It will show them and you if you've achieved your goals and objectives. It would also help them measure your success and the overall impact and prove that what you're doing is really making a difference in the community. So some tips here for evaluation. First, specify your program and objectives in measurable terms. All right, that's the M in SMART, measurable. Okay, it sounds really obvious, but if your objectives are not measurable, how are you going to measure them? All right, so make sure they're measurable from the beginning. So my example was to increase the reading level of at least 75% of the student participants. All right, we're going to be able to know at the end of that program if we were successful or not. It's going to be easy to measure. Next, identify key indicators of success. So some things are more easy to measure than others, all right? So for example, if we had a food bank and our objective was to serve 500 families a month, did we serve 500 families a month? Yes or no? It's easy to see. The indicators of success are pretty clear. Other programs, of course, are not as easy to measure. The indicators of success might not be as clear. So for example, if we had a mentoring program for teenage girls, how are we going to measure if we were successful or not? So the tip that I usually offer here is to stop and think of both qualitative and quantitative indicators of success. So if our project was to increase increase the self-esteem of teenage girls, some of the quantitative things we could measure would be less absences from school, participation in extracurricular activities, participation in class, less detentions, right? Those are all things that might not have been abundantly clear when I said self-esteem, right? But when we stop and really think about those quantitative indicators, it's like, oh, that would definitely prove that their self-esteem had increased. Also, let's think of the qualitative things we could measure. Again, we're thinking about self-esteem of teenage girls. We could have them keep a journal. We could have them participate in a peer group. We could do an interview with their parents. We could do an interview with their teachers. We could do an interview with the girls themselves. So there are indicators of success there. So just stop and think about what they are as part of your evaluation process, because it'll make it more successful. Also outline the data collection and analysis activities. So going back to my literacy example, if our goal was to increase the reading level, I sure hope that we have taken with their baseline data, right? So we know where their reading level is to start if we want to increase it, right? So make sure you have you outline the data collection and develop a timeline to monitor the success of the program on an ongoing basis. A lot of times, of course, with these grants that we get from foundations, we're going to have to report maybe at the midterm and at the end once the grant period has ended. So we want to know, not just for the grant maker, but for ourselves, if we're successful. So back to my literacy example, if we are working to increase their reading level and at the midterm point, we're not anywhere near close to 75% of the students at the reading level where they should be, we might need to go back and rethink and say, okay, instead of having them receive 1 day of tutoring, they need to receive 2 days of tutoring or whatever it might be, and adjust accordingly. So make sure that you have a timeline to monitor the success. And many grant makers will ask you for your evaluation timeline. I've seen that in proposals before. So it's important to think of that. Evaluation is a big one, so I'm going to pause here and see if anyone has any questions about evaluation.
Thanks, Jeanette. We don't have specific about evaluation, so I can hold off until that. There's one question which says, what makes a proposal for a program officer from a foundation who's reading hundreds of applications? What makes a proposal easier to read? And you might want to take that at the end when you've finished it all.
Yeah, I think if we could hold that one, that would be great. That's okay. A good question, though, and I will touch on that.
Thank you.
So there were no others?
No others at this time.
Great. Next question, why are you the best organization to do the work? This is your organization background. This should hopefully be the easiest part to write, all right? This is where you get to toot your horn a little bit. Again, no matter what the formatting is, at some point, the grant maker is going to want to know why your organization is the best to do this work. So this is where you talk about your mission, your history, maybe some of your other programs and services, your accomplishments, your reputation, your visibility in the community, your track record for success. All right, this is, bear in mind, if you're a newer organization, if you don't have a track record for success, this is where those partnerships and collaborations would be key. So hopefully once you write this section, you can save it in your boilerplate. It won't change that much from proposal to proposal, and you have a little bit of fun writing this part. How will the project sustain itself in the long run? All right, so this is the sustainability section. Foundations tend to think in the long term. So before funding your project, they may be concerned about how you will sustain it after the grant period ends. So no foundation is going to fund you forever, unfortunately, I'm sorry. And your nonprofit can't exist on grant support alone, okay? So you need to think through how your organization will support itself in the long run. What is your business plan? How will you support your project if grant funding is not readily available? So really the key takeaway here is how diverse are your funding streams, all right? So the funding shouldn't only be coming from foundations. I know many of you receive government support. You could also think about corporate support, money from individuals, earned income, all right? There's different streams we can go down, and it's not necessarily appropriate for every nonprofit. Not every nonprofit will have earned income, and that's okay. But very rarely are we approaching one foundation for one project and we receive all of our support from that one foundation. A lot of times foundations will ask, what other support are you receiving, from whom, how much even, and even if you have any pending requests. All right, so that's important to include if they ask that. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's not a bad thing to say, we've already received this funding from this other foundation, and therefore that covers 35% or 40% of our proposal so far, but we need your funding as well to accomplish this project. So that is sustainability. Conclusion. So this is something not always called conclusion. Sometimes it's your final appeal, all right? It could be an other section, which is always wonderful to see in a proposal from a foundation. Is there anything else you'd like to add? That's your conclusion, all right? So this is where you're gonna tailor your proposal specifically to this particular grant maker, their guidelines and their interests. It's kind of like the so what question. If this project is funded, how will life be better? For whom and for why would this funder care? How will this be a mutually beneficial partnership? So getting back to that win-win proposition. The executive summary. Okay, you'll notice that in my little overview of the sections of the proposal, the executive summary was first. But I've put it here at the end in the slides, and that's because how can you summarize something that you haven't written? So that's why I put it at the end. So it's going to come first, all right, but you're going to write it last. And the executive summary is by far one of the most important parts of the proposal because it's often, I'm sorry to tell you all this, it is often maybe the only thing that the reader who's reading your proposal will read. Why? Because think about it, you're a grant maker. Put on your foundation hat for a second. You've received 150 proposals, and you need to start weeding them down and narrowing them down. So you're going to read the summary or the overview of each of those proposals and start saying yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and narrowing it down through your pile. So it's definitely going to be the first thing that they read, and it may be the only thing that they read. So you want to make sure it's clear, concise, and compelling. All right, it's like the appetizer to the main dish. You want them to read your summary, your overview, and you want them to keep reading. So you've whet their palates, if you want to think of it that way. All right. The executive summary includes your statement of need, a brief description of your project, including your goals and objectives, information about your organization as a whole, and also most importantly, how much money you're asking for. So a lot of times as we write our proposals, we don't want to include that information, but if the grant maker doesn't have a specific question that says, what is your ask? You know, what is the total amount you're asking for? You should probably include that in your executive summary. I'm going to move on to supporting materials in a second, but I'll pause to see if anyone has any questions about sustainability, the conclusion, or the executive summary.
We do, Jeanette, and there was actually an evaluation question too that came in just a little. And that was that if there is, when you're doing an online format and there's no separate section for evaluation, do you include it in your planning methodology section, the ongoing evaluation? Where is it the best piece to fit in?
Yeah, if they don't ask you specifically about your evaluation, I would try to include it anywhere. I would definitely include it as part of your methodology or your implementation plan, probably. That's why that boilerplate is helpful. So if you have an answer to all those questions and you have that in a Word document and you're cutting and pasting into the form that the grant maker has, you can see what information you didn't get to talk about, and you can see where it might fit in somewhere else. So implementation or methodology would probably be fine, yeah.
Okay. And another question which said that looked at a funder who asked to put the project summary in like one paragraph, and it's very challenging when you have to do it when it's not even a page, and it might be less than that. If you have that kind of word constraints, what would be your top suggestions for folks who have that?
I'll be honest, I filled out a proposal once that said, explain your project in one sentence. And it's like, but like, how do I possibly explain it in one sentence? It's very hard. So I would say it's not so much just what you're saying, but that it is clear, concise, and compelling. You really want to grab the reader's attention. So focus on the impact in the community. I would say that's the most important part. So the results, the outcome, if you can maybe focus on that a little. It's hard though. It's almost like a test, right? They're like testing us to see if we can be clear, concise, and compelling. So it's not easy. I'm with you. It's really difficult, and hang in there if you ever get a tricky grant maker that's trying to make your life not so fun.
Thanks, Jeanette. That's perfect. No more questions.
Okay, so let's move on to supporting materials. So funders, along with your proposal, will ask for a number of documents. Always, always, always follow the funder's guidelines. Include everything that they ask for and very little of anything else. Because a lot of times they use this as a checklist. All right, they're looking for a credible organization. They've asked you to attach 3 items. Did you attach the 3 items? Can you follow directions? It sounds really simple, but a lot of times these foundations don't have a big staff or any staff at all, and they're not going to be able to pick up the phone and say, hi, Jeanette, this is Carol from such and such foundation. You didn't include all of your attachments. Can you please send those to us? No, they're just going to put you in the no pile. And it's a really silly reason to be kind of like dinged or end up in the no pile. So make sure that you're following their directions. So some of the things that they could ask you for. Certainly they're going to want your budget, which I'm not going to go into detail today because we could spend a whole hour and a half talking about the budget alone. But there are resources on our website about budgeting, and I'll show you where those live. They'll probably ask for a copy of your letter of determination from the IRS, proving that you're a legal nonprofit. They might also ask for audited financial statements, your 990, your general operating budget for the last year or years. All right, things like audits can be expensive. And so if you don't have something a funder requests, don't just leave it out. Call and ask if it will be acceptable to submit something else. So see if you can get the grant maker on the phone or send them an email and say, we don't have audited financial statements. Can we submit our unaudited financial statements? And a lot of times that'll be okay. But don't just not include it because it'll look like you're not following directions. Other things they could ask you for, your list of your board of directors, along with their names and affiliations, bios of your key staff, lots of different things. They might, who knows? They could ask you for a lot of things. So only include what they're asking for. I have seen online applications that give you like 1 or 2 empty spots that you could include something that they didn't ask for as like an additional attachment. That's great. Maybe you could include your annual report or something like that. You can also, if it's an online application, which is one plus, a thumbs up for online applications, is you can include a link. So in your project description, or as part of your evaluation or whatever section you're talking about, you can say something like, visit our YouTube page to hear more about testimonials from our constituents, or check out our website and download our annual report, and you can include the link. So feel free to include those links if at all possible. And you have things like something on your YouTube page, or photos from an event or something like that they're not asking you for, but you think are important to include, because you're not, you're not putting them in their face. You're not including something they're not asking for, but you're giving them the option to visit a link at their leisure, I guess you could say. So overall, you want to make sure that your proposal is legible, it's easy to read, it's free from typos. If you can have someone else outside of your program or outside of your organization read the proposal, that's awesome. Maybe there's someone else on this phone call that you can swap proposals and be your proofreader. That's great. I was working on something the other day. We spend so much time on proposals, right? It becomes like our sweat, blood, and tears. We put a lot of effort and time into them. I was working on something the other day that wasn't a proposal, but it was a big, important document. And I had spent a lot of time on it, and I knew that it said board of directors. I was positive it said board of directors. I gave it to my colleague to read, and it said broad of directors. So just make sure that somebody else reads it, because we do spend a lot of time on these, and things can get overlooked easily. So again, that just helps with your credibility. Is it free from typos? Is it easy to read? I can talk about that part now. So if Maker doesn't have a format, to answer the easy to read question, I would try to make certain sections. I would number them. I would number your pages. I would bold or underline the different headings. And I would certainly number the sections so it's clear and easy for them to follow. If you can include a table of contents, sometimes they'll ask you for a table of contents. If they don't ask you for a table of contents because they don't have a format, you could include a table of contents. That would be easy too. So that answers the easier to read question. But is there any other questions about supporting materials?
Not at this time, Jeanette.
Okay, great. So moving on to the follow-up. Okay, so once you've submitted your proposal and you've done everything you can do, you just sit back and let them make their decision. All right, this is probably the hardest part of the process, because it's out of your hands, it's into their hands, and the answer is going to be yes or no, right? As you can see here from the silly picture, it's going to go one or two ways. There's never hardly ever, I should say, a middle of the road. The answer is going to be yes or no. But this is where the real work begins. And we're going to look at both of these roads here. So let's start with yes, because that one's more fun. So let's assume, hooray, everyone, congratulations. Give yourselves a pat on the back. The answer is yes. You got the grant. You've done everything right, and with a little bit of luck, you got your proposal funded. You were approved by the grant maker. Congrats. First and foremost, please don't treat them like an ATM and only go to them when you need money, all right? You want to keep them informed. You want to be responsive. I always send a thank you letter, all right? Sometimes you'll get an email, kind of an informal email from the program officer saying that your proposal was funded, and then you'll get a very formal letterhead letter in the mail. So I actually send both thank you notes in that way. I'll send a reply immediately to the program officer, as well as a very formal thank you letter. This also gives you an opportunity to not only express your appreciation for the grant, but to tell the funder once again how the grant is going to make a difference in the people you're serving. All right, so receiving a grant isn't necessarily the end of the process. In fact, this is the beginning of the relationship, all right? So that's why you want to keep the funder informed, right? They're your partner. Program officer is it's like you're dating, right? You want to keep them up to date on what's going on. You also want to be responsive. So be a part of keeping them informed is sending all of the required reports in on time. All right. So we're so quick to make sure that we get our proposals in on time that we forget that the report, the midterm or the final report, is just as important to the grant maker. All right. Because that tells them how their money was spent. And if you don't submit that on time, it does not look good for your organization. So be sure to submit those on time and be responsive. And also just do what you said you were going to do. All right. This type of communication is a good way to build a relationship with a funder, as well as pave the way for a renewal request. A lot of times, though, of course, unfortunately, the answer is no. I'm sorry. Again, it's just kind of the law of averages. It does take a little bit of luck. We usually say 1 in 3 a proposal is funded. If you're a new organization, it can be really hard to get that first grant, but I promise you, once you get the first one, it does get easier. It's not personal. I know we do spend a lot of time on these, again, sweat, blood, and tears, but it's not personal. So if you can, find out why and do it as graciously as possible. So I still send a thank you note. You're like, you send a thank you note for a no? I do. I send a thank you note for a no because it helps ask about future funding if possible. So I send something that says like, dear grant maker, thank you so much for your time and consideration and your commitment to women's health or to breastfeeding. Although we were hoping for a more favorable outcome, we know that it was a very competitive and difficult decision to make. As we continue to move forward on this important issue, we would appreciate any feedback or suggestions you could provide regarding our proposal or project, and we look forward to exploring future opportunities with you. We will follow up with a telephone call at your convenience. So we're not only trying to figure out why there, but we're also asking about future funding. So if we could get the grant maker on the phone, that would be awesome. We could maybe find out why. All right, they might just say, it's not a good time. But apply next year. Or we've given away all of our grant funding we possibly can this year for our women's health initiatives. So apply next year. That would be great to know, because at least we know that we were on the right track and the grant maker is interested. It's just not a good time. They might say that this, well, they care about, pregnancy or women's health. They're not focused on breastfeeding. That's not an area that's of interest to them, and that's okay. So we're just going to move on, and we're going to seek other prospects, and that's fine to know. Knowing is half the battle. So if you think you find a great match and you don't get funded, and you can find out that in the grant maker's eyes it's not a good match, then you can move on. So ask about future funding and move on. Don't take it personally. You can still keep the foundation staff informed of your good work and the progress you are making. Please don't just add them to your monthly newsletter. That would not be strategic communication, right? We want to be strategic. But if this is really an issue that they care about, it would be good to let them know the success or the outcomes of your project, all right? Because your missions are aligned and they care about this issue, and you want to inform them about how the project was successful. So that would be great to be able to tell them about how the project was successful. Before I move on to key takeaways, does anyone have any questions about follow-up? Yes, no, how to use this as a strategic time to cultivate a relationship with a grant maker?
One question we have was that since a lot of our breastfeeding coalitions approach foundations that might be ancillary to, the work that we do. They might be doing more chronic disease prevention or some of the other things, and they do get a lot of no's. And to make that connection would be one of the follow-up things. It's as much educating. So anything about, when you're writing a proposal for a funder where this is not their core, but this is an ancillary thing, how might you make that case more compelling?
I would send a very short and sweet email with a few bullets, include maybe maybe a one-page attachment outlining the impact of the program and how it's relevant to what their interest area is. So if they're interested in disease prevention, I would definitely highlight that, the results from the program, highlighting the disease prevention element. So it's a clear link for the grant maker to see. You know, we got to kind of help them along in the process to see the connection sometimes. I can understand that. But keep it short and sweet, include maybe a few bullets, and then like attach an infographic or attach a one-page report or testimonials or data or whatever it might be. But yeah, sometimes we have to make that link for them. So in their head, they're focused on disease prevention, and they don't see maybe the impact of your program as being related to that. So we have to really kind of push them in that direction. So it's a good point to make. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so the key takeaways from today, again, are to start with an outline. This is part of your planning process. Start with that boilerplate that I mentioned. See if you can answer all of those questions that I went through on what grant makers really want to know. See if you can answer all of that as part of your planning process. And you'll know you're in good shape to start your research and the writing. Keep the language clear and concise, especially that executive summary, that overview. You really want to make sure that you've captured their attention so they keep reading, and draw that clear line between the focus area of the funder's interests. So how does what you plan to accomplish fit in with what they plan to accomplish, okay? Follow the funder's guidelines. Please don't get dinged or put in the no pile for something silly, like you didn't restate the question, or you went over character limits, or you didn't include a supporting material that they ask for. And then, of course, revise and edit before submitting. I have a website to show you and our database to show you, but I'm going to pause again here to see if anyone has just any general proposal writing questions. I'm happy to take them now before we move on to that research tool.
All right, Jeanette, we do have one, and that is that for a lot of our constituents, the evaluation piece, kind of doing the SMART objectives and goals is good, but we start thinking about the evaluation piece after we've written the plan. And how would you suggest that? Would you think the continuous evaluation all through the planning process, or any more wisdom you can give us about the evaluation?
Yeah.
That would,
So certainly it depends on the project, right? It's hard to make a big statement about it because it depends on what the project is that you're doing. But I would certainly say if you can outline evaluation throughout the program, that is only going to make your job easier in the long run. And it helps with that follow-up too. If your project is funded, you can keep the grant maker informed and say, we're so excited to tell you that we've already reached the 75%, limit that we had hoped for, and now we're working towards 100%. But so certainly outlining the data collection and analysis activity is helpful. Putting together a timeline, even if the grant maker doesn't ask for it, just for yourself is helpful. And of course, the evaluation should be thought of before you begin the project. Again, that might seem very basic and intuitive, but think about that as part of your planning process. How are we going to know if we're successful? And think about that as part of your plan. I hope that answered your question.
It does. Thank you, Jeanette.
Okay. Any other questions? We'll have plenty of time to take more questions if anyone thinks of anything, but I want to show you our database.
Yeah, none at this time.
Okay. So first is grantspace.org. So this is a free website. It's our online learning community. And it's just a great resource. You can access this from anywhere. It's completely free of charge. You can search by subject or skill. So if you're interested in learning more about organizational sustainability or startups or leadership and management, you can do that here. For example, we could go to the proposal writing tab. Here's a interview with a grant maker about red flags when you're reviewing a proposal. There's frequently asked questions as part of this live chat. Applications not accepted, get on the radar. So a lot of grant makers don't accept unsolicited requests. This is some tips on how to get onto their radar. Frequently asked questions, and sample documents. There's also more sample documents up here under sample documents. So this gives you sample proposals, sample budgets, sample cover letters, which we don't see so much anymore, but some grant makers might ask for them, a letter of inquiry or an LOI, or a letter of intent. They're all the same thing. It's basically a mini version of your proposal that a grant maker may ask for first. So before you submit your full proposal, they'll want an LOI, and that's great because then you don't have to write the whole thing. You can just submit a one-page letter and make sure that you're on the right page. So these are all proposals that have been funded, so it's a great sample for you to look at. You can go to training and see all the courses that we offer. There is one on budgeting. There is one on sustainability. There is one on financial planning. If you happen to be in any of our cities, please stop by and see us. You can visit us at any of those locations, as well as any of our partner locations. So if you come here and you put in your zip code, you can pull up one of our 450 partner locations. I'll just put in Florida. Maybe someone on the line is from Florida. Let's see. I'll pull up this map, and it will show you where they all are in the United States. And it will also show you the list, so where we are in Florida, for example. And again, there's 450 partner locations throughout the world, actually. So you can see the hours of these partner locations. The key here at these partner locations is it gives you access to the database for free. Okay, so the database I'm about to show you could go to this library here, for example. They're mostly public libraries and universities, some community foundations, and say you want to access the foundation directory online, and you can access that for free at one of those partner locations. So this is our research tool. It does cost a fee to subscribe, but that's why we offer it at these other locations for free. So please take advantage of maybe one that's close and convenient to you. Okay, so the foundation directory online. So again, I like to think about grant seeking like dating, all right? We want to find the grant makers that care about the same things that we care about. All right, so who are the grant makers that care about women's health? Who are the grant makers that care about reproductive health? Who are the grant makers that care about breastfeeding? That's who we want to find, right? Because we know that they care about what we're doing, and so they're going to be the most likely to support our cause. So this is the tool that you're going to use to find those grant makers, to make that prospect list. So I usually recommend that folks start by searching grant makers. All right, let me log back in here. Searching grant makers. Okay, certainly if we knew the name of a grant maker, we could put that in here. We could put in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We could pull up their profile. We could learn a little bit more about their history and their giving. But a lot of times, of course, we don't know their names, right? Or we only know the names of two and we want to expand our list. In that instance, you're going to use these fields to narrow your results, okay? So to narrow your search. So this is kind of like Match.com. It's kind of like Match.com for grant seeking, right? We're going to find the grant makers that care about the same thing we care about based on our particular criteria here. So let's start with location. So we have grant maker location, and we also have geographic focus. So geographic focus is where your project takes place. So are you in Florida? Are you in Alabama? Are you in California? Wherever you might be, that's your geographic focus. So there's an index here of both states and countries. All right, so we could say that our program takes place in Georgia, and we could click that from the left. It'll add it to the right, and that would be our geographic focus. The grant maker location is helpful, right? If we want to find grant makers who are in our city, who are in our metro area, who are in our county, we could do that. But I would also encourage you to search by geographic focus, because just because their geographic focus is Georgia doesn't necessarily mean that they're located in Georgia. So I like to run both searches and say, show me the grant makers in Georgia, and then show me the grant makers whose geographic focus is Georgia. It's going to be different. All right. So I don't care if they're located in Timbuktu, right? If they care about nonprofits in my state, in my community, I want to know. So that's your geographic focus. I'm actually going to leave the geographic focus so as not to play favorites to any one particular state. I'm going to leave geographic focus blank for my sample search today. Support strategy. This is the type of support that you're interested in. You'll see that there are all of the different types of support listed here. So equipment, general support, again, general support and program development support are the most popular. The number of this number here next to all of the terms in the index on the left for all of the indexes are the number of grant makers in the database that are offering program development support or are offering money for marketing, whatever it might be. So you can see some of them are much bigger than others. Management and leadership development, there's only one. We're working on expanding this list and getting to know grant makers better, but money for publications, whatever it might be, that's what you'll pick from here. So I'm going to choose program development, and I'm also going to choose general operating support. Okay, you'll notice I pulled it, added it to the right, and it automatically added it with an or, and that's fine in this instance. But you'll see what I mean here in a second. We could change that if we wanted to help our cause. So field of interest. Okay, this is your bread and butter. This is what do you do. Okay, you'll notice there's letters at the top. We could go to those letters and we can scroll down from there. We could also just start to type. Okay, so we could put in females and health. Right. You see health compared to healthcare access, this is a much broader search. This is a much more narrow search. So I pulled it from the left, I added it to the right, and it automatically added that or. I could change that to an and, all right? So it's not females or health separate, but females and health together. This would be a very broad search. I'm sure this would pull up a large number of results. In looking through here for you all, I found that we do have reproductive health care in here as well, which is great. 459 grant makers offer support for reproductive health care. That's wonderful. And a new term, which we updated this index in July, it might have been called something different. We have maternal and perinatal health, which I think sounds great for all of you. So we could leave this in again as an or. We could just maybe separate them out. I would actually probably do a search for reproductive health care, run that result, and then do a search for maternal and perinatal health and run that one separately just to see what I got. Sometimes I don't like to put too many things here. You can add more than one or two, but it gets a little confusing. So let's run this and see what we find. You'll notice there is this box here that says exclude grant makers not accepting applications. So again, I think I mentioned this earlier, but many grant makers don't accept unsolicited proposals. All right, so they pick who they want to support, and we can't even submit a proposal to them. And we got to work to get on their radar. So you can click this box and you can run the search, and it will exclude those grant makers. But I would actually encourage you to not check the box, to run the search and see who those grant makers are, because we could never get them on. We could never be aware of them or work to get them on us on their radar if we don't know their names. So run the search, see who they are first. We got 55 results, which is awesome. Now this isn't narrowed any way by location or geographic focus. That's okay for now. We're thinking very broadly, and that's okay. We have 55 results. Under this narrow your results, we can see there's actually one in Romania and one in Switzerland. The majority are in the United States. The majority are in California, then Florida, then Massachusetts. That's just, again, their location, not necessarily their geographic focus. The different types of grant makers that they are, their total giving. All right, the majority of them are big guys, so that's good, or little guys, I'm sorry. But we do have a few here that have a substantial amount of money to give. We'll look at that in a little bit more detail. Here, their geographic focus. So I'm not surprised that it is our bigger states here in the United States, but they might not all be located in California, but they care about California. And then finally here, the applications accepted. So I would run the search and then see how many of your 55 are accepting applications, and 32 are accepting applications, accepting proposals. So 19 of them we can't reach out to at this point in time, but who knows? You might have a personal connection there. You might have some type of connection. So I would say run the search and then narrow it down. So I'm going to narrow it down and see who the 32 are, because these are the 32 that we could submit a proposal to this year. Okay, so once you get here, you can narrow or you could sort this list by total assets or total giving for the year. Now that doesn't mean that they've given 13 million for our field of interest here, although that would be wonderful. It would be wonderful, but this just means that that's how much they've given to nonprofits overall. All right. So we can sort by total giving and say, okay, who's got the most money to give away? The Gates Foundation is up there at the top. Some of the ones on this list, it does say NA here at the bottom. That doesn't mean that they're like a bad grant maker or anything. It just means that they're a company, all right, like Kmart here, or the Rams football. So they're not required to report to the IRS what their total giving is to nonprofits because they're a company. So don't let that discourage you. That's the only bad thing about sorting this list by total giving is it puts these guys at the bottom, but that's okay. If you're at one of our libraries, you can email yourself this list or the records. I would email yourself both. Check the boxes and email yourself the list and have this information at your fingertips once you get back to your office. So let's look at one of these, for example. If anyone's from Birmingham, you're in luck today because I'm going to look at this Community Foundation of Greater Birmingham. Okay, so this is what a typical grant maker profile looks like. All right, we have their contact information up here at the top, a link to their website. We know that they're a community foundation. We have links to their 990s. So this is a 990 PF. It stands for private foundation. This is where the majority of the information that's in our database is pulled from. This IRS report that grant makers have to submit a form to, just like we have to submit our 990 as nonprofits. And then we have all of this yummy, juicy, wonderful information here on the side. So there's a lot of information in here. I would start by looking at limitations. Okay, so you can click it here or you can scroll down and find it here. Limitations is basically to know if you should keep reading or not. All right, so this is a community foundation. Obviously, they're focused on Birmingham. It says giving limited to these specific 5 counties in Alabama. It says no support for religious organizations for religious purposes. We see that often. Grant makers steer clear of politics and religion sometimes. No grants to individuals except for scholarships or for national fundraising drives, sponsorships of fundraising events, endowment funds, debt reduction, or replacement of government fund cuts. Okay, so that's just good to know, the types of support that they're not going to offer, but they do offer general operating support, it looks like, or program development support. So again, do I keep reading? All right, if we were in another county in Alabama, they would come up in our search because if we did a geographic focus Alabama, they would come up, but if we weren't in one of these counties, then I would suggest that we not apply for them. Another important thing is the purpose and activities. So this is kind of like the foundation's mission statement. If they specifically mentioned breastfeeding in here, that would be a definite good match. If they specifically mentioned women's health or maternal care or reproductive health, like that, we would know that we were on the right track. This is a community foundation. Obviously, they care about community issues, which maternal and perinatal health they consider one of those. So that's great. But this is kind of like the foundation's mission statement, if you want to think about it that way. They do mention some of their program areas here. Here are all of the different fields of interest that they support, as well as their population groups. All right, and then we have the different supports, type of support that they offer, and their application information. Okay, so this is what they want, when they want it, and how they want it in terms of the proposal. So We also have information on their initial approach. So it says to complete the online brief proposal first. So I'd imagine this is like a letter of inquiry or something, maybe a quick online form that we fill out, and then they might invite the full proposal. It says that it appears that they have a couple different deadlines here. We know when final notification is given. We would probably want to go to their website to confirm what the January date was. My guess is the date is always in January and always in March, but the specific date changes year to year. So January, March, July, and September, different cycles. What else does it say here? It says the foundation uses a results-based approach to grant making with a focus on 4 results, most important to the community's well-being, okay, and identified by data and community input. All right, so full proposals are accepted by invitation only based on brief proposals. So we need to fill out the brief proposal first, then we're invited to submit the full proposal. So we got to do that online application first. So this is what a sample profile looks like. We also have their officers and directors, the number of staff that they have, and their grants. So why is it helpful to look at grants that this community foundation has already awarded? Well, because then we can learn a little bit more about them, their history of giving, and see as much as we can about this potential grant maker. Remember, grant makers are like these eggs that we're trying to crack. All right, we want to learn as much about them as we possibly can. So if we can find out they've supported similar organizations, similar breastfeeding initiatives, similar women's health, reproductive health, maternal health programs, then we know that we're on the right track. All right. MAP grants is helpful if you have a national grant maker, because it takes all of the grants that they've awarded and puts them in a map. So obviously this grant maker cares about, Alabama. So we can see that their giving is mostly there. Chart the grants takes all of those subject areas that they support and puts them into a chart. So we can see maybe where their priority lies. So environment, health, health is much higher here compared to arts and culture, compared to philanthropy, compared to education. So when you get one of those grant makers that has kind of that long list of all of the subject areas that they support, we can find out maybe where we fit in there. What else? So that was chart grants. News, social media, and publications, again, has this grant maker been in the news? What are they tweeting about? And do we have any reports that we could read about them that they've published the funding of? It would be helpful to read if we were in Alabama, we were thinking about approaching this grant maker, because they have funded the publishing of this specific report, which happens to be about them. So I probably want to read that. So this is what a sample profile looks like. This was all under the search grant maker side of the database. So we were looking for grant makers based on what we do in relation to what the grant maker does. So we searched for grant makers that cared about maternal and perinatal health and are offering the type of support we need. One of my other favorite ways to search is to go to the search grants side. So this is grants that have already been awarded. Again, we're trying to find grant makers that care about the same things that we do. So what you could do here is 2 things. One, you could put in a recipient name, maybe a similar organization or a competitor organization, or maybe a nonprofit that supports a similar population group, but in a different way. So maybe you know of a name of a recipient, we could put that in here, and we could run that search, and we could find out who's supporting them. You would have your basic template of your cover letter, but you would tailor it specifically to the employer that you're applying to. The same thing is true to a proposal. That also is a good tip for year to year. So if you don't get funding one year and they say apply to us next year, and you're applying with the exact same proposal and nothing has changed in a whole year, that wouldn't necessarily be good. I would try to tweak it a little bit. Again, the goal is still the goal, but what have maybe you learned in the last year? I would definitely want to highlight that. But spraying and praying is not the way to go. I would do a targeted search for the grant makers that you share the connection with, and then I would make sure that if you're applying for different grants under the same foundation, that it's clear that this project fits in with this grant because of X, Y, and Z, and the same project fits into this grant because of X, Y, and Z. Or what would be even better is if you could get the grant maker on the phone first and ask them and say, we have this project. We know that you care about this issue. Which grant should we apply for? That would probably be the better way to go and try to see if you can get their guidance on that first. But otherwise, if you want to apply for 2 grants, there's not like that's an absolute no or anything like that. I would just make sure it's clear that it fits under both grants for different reasons, and go from there.
Absolutely agree with you on that one. And so we did have some questions about the relationship building because many of our audience might be approaching foundations for the first time. Some of the pre-proposal relationship building with these foundations, so that for something that might come up in the future. Any strategies about just relationship building with foundations?
I know that I mentioned this earlier, but it's important, so I'll mention it again. Really highlight how your project fits in with what they want to accomplish. So people give to people, right? Foundations are people, and they have their own goals, right? Mm-hmm. And missions and things that they're working to accomplish. So how is what you're doing helping them achieve their goals? If you have a contact or a connection that can help you get a foot in the door, that's certainly helpful, and I would encourage you to do that and work that connection. The favor that you're asking of the connection is not help us get the grant, it's help us get our foot in the door, so you can build that relationship on your own. Some of the best people to be kind of your reference to help you get the foot in the door are your current program officers. So if you're working with 2 foundations right now, you're thinking about approaching another foundation, see if one of those current program officers could be kind of a reference or help you get the foot in the door for another foundation that you're not working with yet. It is hard as a new nonprofit or a new organization or a first-time project, and it takes a little bit more effort, and that's maybe where a partnership or a collaboration can help in that way.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeanette. This has been a really valuable session, and I know that our listeners will be logging in again to listen to the recording because there was so much good information. So
you're so welcome. Again, I wish you all the best. Happy writing.
Foundation Center are our really good friends. They've done on-site trainings at our national conference in DC as well. So thank you again. And a quick announcement before we leave, and that is next Wednesday on September 23rd from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern. We are going to have a webinar for coalitions on how coalitions can engage in constellations. So you should have got an invite for that. We hope to see you then. And thank you so much again, everyone. Until next time.